As we noted in our previous module, when it comes to media consumption, the vast majority of consumers do everything. They read, they watch, they listen, and they experience it as a seamless, always-on content offering. And the SEM segmentation tool is extremely effective in highlighting and narrating this landscape. Much has been made in recent months about the demise of reading, but we need to differentiate between reading as a behavior and measured readership of print, whether newspaper or magazine. 52% of adults read newspapers or magazines compared to 93% watching TV in a week, but only 41% continue to limit their reading to a printed edition. 1 in 10 magazine or newspaper readers are online readers, but only 5% of them read exclusively on a digital platform. Not surprisingly, readership is at its zenith in SEM Cluster 5. 52% of all adults in this cluster read newspapers, either print or digital, compared to an average 38% for all adults. Incidence of total magazine reading is even higher, 57% of SEM Cluster 5 against an average 39%. But as with newspapers, there are fewer readers of printed editions. Newspapers and magazines remain a viable media platform for reaching the top end of the market. Effectively, it's really only in SEM Cluster 1 and SEM Cluster 2 that the viability of this medium as an advertising platform is called into question. When it comes to analyzing listening behavior in the post-AMPS landscape, we need to mine for insights across several available databases. Radio continues to offer high weekly reach across the full SEM spectrum. The last RAMS database reports radio listenership at 92%. The Establishment Survey 2019 database reports an average 87%, but it does offer us additional insights into listening location and also device. Radio is often perceived to be an in-car medium, but 9 out of every 10 weekly listeners are listening in the home. This would account for the fact that 3 out of every 4 listen on a radio set or a hi-fi, whatever that is these days, at some point. But it is always interesting to note the enhanced commuting mobility at the top end of the market. In SEM Cluster 5, 73% of adults listen to radio while traveling in a car or taxi. This does diminish down the SEM spectrum, but even in SEM Cluster 1, almost half the weekly listeners will at some point listen to radio while commuting. Perhaps the most significant insight of all is the number of people listening to radio on a mobile device each week. Whether you are targeting listeners, viewers, or readers, the ubiquitous nature of the cell phone as a content delivery platform needs to be factored into every advertising campaign. The SEM segmentation model also creates an ideal platform for mapping out the distribution of stations. SABC ALS stations have a strong affinity with SEM Cluster 1, 2, and 3. From SEM Cluster 4, other station offerings become more viable. Metro FM takes over from Ukhozi FM as the biggest station in SEM Cluster 4 and SEM Cluster 5. But from SEM Cluster 4, other more recognizable regional commercial stations gain traction, along with national PBS offerings such as SAFM and Radio Sonogrense. Program content listened to most often also provides insights into the zeitgeist of the different market sectors. At the top end, financial reports and traffic are heavily relied on by listeners, whereas at the other end of the spectrum, religious programs and radio dramas gain traction. Interestingly enough, talk radio has its strongest affinity within SEM Cluster 3, which may also highlight the potential power of community radio as the voice of the people. An interest in self-help content also provides a lens into the contribution of community radio as a platform for community upliftment. Often too small to measure at an individual station level, collectively, community radio is particularly effective in the middle market, where almost 1 in every 5 radio listeners, 18%, will tune in to a community station during the average week. From SEM Cluster 4, the contribution of regional commercial stations begins to establish a foothold. And in many respects, successful regional commercial stations do in fact play the role of community station on a larger canvas. So from a media planning perspective, in abandoning the medium as the message mindset and embracing the reality that the message is content, marketers can be assured that the SEM segmentation model has the agility and the functionality to tap into a rich source of freely available marketing and advertising data.